Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're really getting into the weeds on scheduling for big, complex capital projects.
That's right. Think major infrastructure, like the Rotatory-Dvarzy interchange that was mentioned in the source material we looked at. Massive undertakings.
Exactly. And our mission here is to unpack schedule risk, specifically this idea of slack or float or folgas, as our sources call it.
And importantly, why having what looks like a lot of time on the schedule, a long deadline, can actually be a bit of an illusion.
Right. It feels safe, but some parts of these projects are always running right on the edge.
And what's really fascinating and kind of the core of our discussion today is how different people see that risk. Like how a junior analyst looking at the schedule data might see one thing.
Well, a seasoned professional, someone who's lived through these projects, sees something entirely different. Same data, totally different conclusions about the real danger zones.
Precisely. So, to get everyone on the same page, let's quickly define the two basic types of slack we're dealing with. First up, free slack.
Okay, free slack. What's the nutshell version?
Free slack is pretty straightforward on the surface. It's how much you can delay one specific task without delaying the very next task that depends on it.
So if task A has, say, 3 days of free slack, I can let it slide for 3 days, and task B, which starts right after, still starts on time.
Exactly. It's very localized wiggle room.
Got it. And the second type, total slack.
Total slack. Now, this sounds like the big one, the safety net everyone wants.
Because it's about the whole project deadline.
Right. Total slack is the total amount of time one specific task can be delayed before it actually pushes back the final completion date of the entire project.
And this number can be large.
Oh, yeah. Especially early in a complex project schedule, you might see total slack values in the weeks, months, sometimes like hundreds of days.
Wow. Okay. And that leads us straight into the paradox, doesn't it? The difference in perspective.
It really does, because what the sources point out, what the, and let's call it the junior analyst view, initially sees, is this weird disconnect.
What kind of disconnect?
Well, you see these really high total slack numbers, suggesting loads of time, but then you look at the free slack for the actual hands-on work, the stuff happening out in the field, and it's 0, or maybe 1 day. Constantly near 0 for the critical execution steps.
So the big picture says, relax, we have time. But the day-to-day reality is, if this task slips by an hour, the next one is immediately late.
You nailed it. And that's incredibly dangerous. The sources have a great term for this high total slack. They call it a mathematical cushion, not a practical margin.
A mathematical cushion, I like that. Meaning it exists on paper in the calculation, but you can't actually use it in the real world?
Pretty much. It's an artifact of the schedule logic. If you delay one of those 0 free slack operational tasks by even a single day, boom, that delay instantly eats into that big total slack number. It doesn't buffer the next task, it buffers the end date.
Which creates this totally false sense of security. Managers might think, oh, the finish line is way out there, we can absorb small delays.
When in reality, the core operational sequence is incredibly fragile. It's running on a nice edge day in, day out. The project's heartbeat is way more volatile than the final deadline suggests.
Okay, so if that mathematical cushion is an illusion, where are the real pressure points? Where does the schedule have absolutely no give? Let's dive into those areas with 0 free slack. The sources group them, right?
Yes, they highlight 3 really critical classes of activities where free slack is basically always 0. These are the chains where any slip-up has immediate consequences.
All right, class number 1.
Contractual milestones. These are all the administrative and financial gates you have to pass through.
Stuff like getting the proposal accepted, signing the actual contract.
Exactly. Getting the official order to proceed, making that initial down payment, and crucially, the final client sign-off at the end.
These seem less like work and more like paperwork, but they're critical path.
Absolutely critical. They often look like they're positioned okay in the schedule, maybe with high total slack, but their free slack is 0 because everything else depends on them happening sequentially. Delay the contract signing.
And the physical work can't start, right?
Not only that, but it can completely block the financial flow. You can't pay suppliers, you can't order materials if that contract isn't inked. It's a hard stop.
Okay, that makes sense. What's the second critical class with 0 free slack?
This one's often the biggest source of headaches, the supply chain. Or supermentos, as the sources term it.
So getting materials and equipment to the site.
Precisely. And the sources stress this applies across all the different work fronts. We're talking fabrication, reservation, and crucially, the delivery of everything. Electrical gear, drainage pipes, specialized concrete or paving materials, water system components, you name it.
And the free slack here is 0 across the board. Why so tight?
Because the field crews are scheduled to install that stuff now. If the delivery truck is late, the installation crew is standing around. There's no buffer between delivery and need. Any delay here risks immediate project paralysis da obra.
Just work stops, waiting for parts.
Exactly. And this area is super volatile anyway, right? You're depending on external manufacturers, shipping logistics, lead times, things outside your direct control. So 0 free slack here is high risk.
Okay, contractual gates, supply chain. What's the third class?
The third one is probably the most intuitive. Field execution, the actual construction work itself.
The digging, the pouring, the building.
Yep. Things like the initial earth moving and site grading terraplanagem, installing complex drainage systems, pouring foundations, so laying down utility networks, roads, paving, but the core civil engineering work.
And these are inherently 0 free slack because they happen in sequence.
Largely, yes. You can't pour foundations before the ground is prepared. You can't pave before the utility pipes are buried. A delay in one directly contaminates the start of the next, pushing everything down the line. Plus, you've got site conditions, weather, coordinating different crews, lots of inherent volatility.
So these 3 areas, contractual, supply chain, and field execution, are where any delay immediately impacts the next step.
That's the key takeaway from the free slack analysis. And the sources add one more kicker.
Oh!
Even the very end of the project, the encerramento or dismobilization phase, things like final site cleanup, working through the punch list of defects, dismantling the site offices.
That also has 0 slack.
It inherits 0 slack.
Yeah.
If you've burned through all your total slack dealing with delays in those earlier critical areas, you have absolutely no time left to handle those final fix-it items or cleanup tasks without pushing the final handover date.
So the junior analyst focusing on free slack correctly sees where the immediate danger lies, even if they may be comforted by that big total slack number.
That's a perfect summary of the initial view. They see the fires right in front of them.
Which leads us to the expert's view. If the junior spots the immediate fires, the expert is looking for what? The hidden embers, the things that will cause a fire later.
Exactly. The senior professional, the expert, goes beyond just free versus total slack. They bring in more nuanced metrics to spot those hidden pressure points, the risks that aren't immediately obvious but are building up.
Okay, this sounds like where the real predictive power comes in. How do they add this extra layer of analysis?
They focus on primarily 2 critical alerts that often get missed in a simpler analysis. The first one is looking for negative slack.
Negative slack. Okay, hold on. If total slack is the time you have before delaying the project, negative slack sounds like you're already out of time.
That's precisely what it means. It signifies the schedule, as planned, is already mathematically impossible without some kind of intervention. You're basically scheduled to finish a task after its successor needs to start.
Whoa, so the plan itself shows you're going to be late.
Yes, unless you do something now. It signals that the time needed for a task, plus its dependencies, is longer than the time available in the schedule logic. You often find this popping up at those critical interfaces.
Like where the supply chain meets the field execution.
Exactly. Where a delivered component needs to be installed immediately. Negative slack is a huge red flag demanding immediate action, like, can we speed up this task? Can we do things in parallel? Do we need to renegotiate something? It means you are essentially borrowing time you don't have.
Okay, negative slack equals urgent problem solving needed. That's alert number 1. What's the second, more nuanced one?
This one is really key, especially for managing suppliers and complex sequences. Asymmetric flexibility. It's about the difference between start flexibility and finish flexibility.
Asymmetric flexibility. Start flex versus finish flex. Okay, this sounds important, but maybe a bit tricky. Can you give us an example?
Sure. Let's stick with the supply chain. Imagine you need a big, custom-built piece of equipment, maybe like a specialized pump system for a water treatment plant section of the project. The Casa de Bomba example from the sources fits here.
Okay, custom pump house equipment.
Right. Now, the expert scheduler looks at 2 kinds of flexibility for ordering and receiving that pump. First is start flex. How much leeway do you have in placing the order?
So how late can I wait before I absolutely have to sign the purchase order with the manufacturer?
Exactly. Maybe the manufacturer isn't super busy right now, or the initial site prep takes a while, so you might have, say, 60 days of start flex. You don't have to rush the order today.
Okay, sounds good. Flexibility is good.
But here's the asymmetry. Let's say that manufacturer, once you place the order, has a fixed, non-negotiable 90-day lead time for fabrication and delivery. And your project schedule absolutely requires that pump to be on-site and ready for installation on day 91 after the order is placed.
Ah, so the clock starts ticking the moment I place the order, and it's a very strict clock.
Precisely. That fixed 90-day delivery window means your finish flex, the wiggle room you have around the completion of that delivery activity, is 0, or maybe 1 or 2 days, practically 0.
So I could start the ordering process late, but once started, the delivery has absolutely no room for error or delay.
That's the essence of asymmetric flexibility. High start flex, near zero finish flex. The risk isn't about starting, it's entirely about finishing on time. Once you commit, the deadline is rigid.
That is a really critical distinction. It means the risk completely shifts from our internal decision-making when to order to the supplier's performance. Can they deliver exactly on time?
Perfectly put. And this pattern, this asymmetry, is incredibly common in supermentos and procurement activities. The sources mentioned ordering electrical materials is another example, or even in some civil works like that pump house, where maybe site access is flexible initially, but once started, it has to integrate perfectly with follow-on work.
And when you have that high start flex, low finish flex situation,
You've essentially pre-configured a bottleneck. A gargalla non concluso, as the sources put it. It's a guaranteed high-pressure point waiting to happen if that supplier slips even a little.
so the expert isn't just watching the critical path activities defined by zero total slack. They're watching activities, especially procurement, with zero finish slack, even if they can start late.
That's a huge part of the value they bring. They're looking at the fragility of the finish times, not just the start times.
Okay, so using these more advanced metrics, negative slack and asymmetric flex, what specific examples did the sources flag as being particularly high risk, like red or orange zones?
Yeah, they gave some clear examples. In the red zone 0 or negative slack, they highlighted that very first step, aceite da proposta, the proposal acceptance, absolutely zero margin, reinforcing its role as a fundamental go-no-go gate.
Makes sense. What else?
Then, critical path steps within execution or permitting, like the example of emissão do PC cliente esgoto. That's the client-side approval or permit related to the sewage system works. The schedule might show only one single day of total slack for that.
Which is basically zero in the real world of paperwork and approvals.
Functionally, yes. Any tiny hiccup there and you've blown it, that's a red flag.
And what about the orange risks, those asymmetric finish flex traps?
The sources pointed clearly to procurement-related permitting, like the emissão do PC cliente pavimentasa, the client-side actions needed for the paving materials. The start of that process might have some float, but the required delivery date for those materials, driven by the paving schedule, is described as effectively locked in a prazo de entrega engessado, a rigid plaster cast deadline.
So again, the expert sees that even if the paperwork starts flexibly, the outcome has no flexibility. They flag it as orange, a potential future bottleneck demanding close monitoring.
Exactly. It's about preemptively identifying where control is lost the moment you press go on an activity, even if go can be pressed a bit later.
This all paints a much more complex and frankly scarier picture than just looking at the final deadline.
Yeah.
It really protects managers from falling into that trap we mentioned earlier, the illusion of comfort.
Oh, absolutely. Which brings us to that whole issue of artificial folga, artificial flack. Those big, comforting total slack numbers that can be so misleading.
Right. Let's talk about those. The sources mentioned some big numbers.
Yeah. Counterintuitively, the activity showing the most total slack can sometimes be masking the biggest risks or constraints elsewhere. They gave examples like the assinatura do contrato, contract signing, maybe showing 174 days of total slack.
174 days. That sounds like an eternity in project time.
Doesn't it? Or maybe early stage work like remoções e demolições, removals and demolitions, showing 130 days or more.
So a project manager looks at that, sees 174 days of buffer on the contract signing and thinks, what? We can take our time negotiating, or we can delay mobilizing the demolition crew.
Exactly. They might feel they have this huge cushion, this massive amount of time they can afford to lose on that specific task without hurting the final project deadline. They might deprioritize it or authorize delays elsewhere, thinking this slack can absorb problems.
But based on everything we've discussed, that's incredibly dangerous. Why? Remind us why that 174 days isn't real breathing room.
Because it's purely a mathematical artifact of the schedule network. That 174 days likely exists only because the activities that come much later on the critical path, the ones with zero free slack and maybe zero finish flex, are so tightly constrained and sequenced.
So it's not extra time for the contract signing itself?
Not in an operational sense. It's just the calculated gap between that early task and the eventual bottleneck downstream. That 174-day cushion is entirely dependent on everything else running perfectly according to plan. The moment something goes wrong on that downstream critical path,
Poof, the cushion evaporates.
instantly, or at least it starts shrinking rapidly. That huge number provides zero practical flexibility for managing the actual work or supplier performance day to day.
And that's the big governance alert, isn't it? The sources were really clear. Managers should not trust those big inflated total slack numbers in isolation.
Absolutely not. They need to trust the combined reading. Look at the total slack, sure, but immediately cross-reference it with the free slack, the negative slack alerts, and especially that asymmetric flex, the start versus finish flexibility. That combined picture tells you where the schedule can truly break.
So ignoring the zero free slack in execution or the rigid finish flex in procurement, just because the total slack looks high. That's managing by spreadsheet, not by reality.
You got it. You're managing a theoretical model, not the messy, volatile reality of a complex construction project. Often, that high total slack is just a symptom of severe rigidity and risk elsewhere in the system.
That is such a powerful lesson for anyone trying to navigate these projects. The place that looks the safest might actually be hiding the biggest danger.
You really have to ask yourself,
Yeah.
is this cushion real? Is it supported by operational flexibility? Or is it just a mathematical echo of a problem somewhere else? If total slack is high, but free slack is low and finish flex is zero, the total slack is practically useless for managing the work.
Okay, so let's try and synthesize this whole deep dive for you, the listener. The fundamental takeaway seems to be that truly understanding schedule risk means going way beyond just looking at the final deadline or the simple slack numbers.
Definitely. The junior analysis, focusing on free slack, is valuable. It correctly flags those three critical fronts: contractual, supply chain, and execution. Those are the zones with zero immediate wiggle room, the ones needing constant daily attention.
But that's reactive, identifying current fires.
Right. The senior analysis, the expert view, is what enables proactive risk management. By bringing in negative slack spotting where the plan is already broken and understanding asymmetric flex, identifying those hidden rigid deadlines, especially in procurement.
That's how you anticipate and mitigate problems before they derail the project.
Exactly. It lets you see the bottlenecks forming, the locked-in failure points that might be months away but are already baked into the schedule logic if you don't intervene. It's the difference between seeing today's delay and forecasting next quarter's crisis.
So it's really about shifting from just managing a timeline to actively managing the project's inherent volatility and constraints.
Couldn't have said it better myself. It's about understanding the fragility underneath the plan.
Okay, so to leave you with that final provocative thought, drawing from this analysis,
When you're looking at your project schedule, resist the urge to feel comfortable just because you see a big total slack number somewhere. Instead, make it a habit to ask the critical follow-up question. Okay, but where in the chain that follows this activity is the finish flexibility zero? Find that point of rigidity because that's likely where your real risk lies hidden.